Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Genius Infinity, and I'm here to talk to you about proof that historical figures of the Bible were dark skinned. Now, some of you may come across this video and hear 2 or 3 seconds into it and say to yourself, so what does it matter that historical figures in the Bible were dark skinned? What does it matter? It matters a great deal for one reason and one reason only. Because it mattered enough for the powers that be in this world to whitewash or present historical facts and figures that were contrary to the King James Version of the Bible. And it is very important for dark-skinned people, African American, Hispanic, anyone who isn't Caucasian, to understand that people of color, dark-skinned people, had a positive place in history. Black people's history, African American history did not start with slavery. There were centuries and centuries of positive impacts to the world that came from black civilization. Okay, so having said all that, I will begin. Okay, Adam was dark skinned, and you can find that in the King James Version, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Dust or dirt of the ground is brown. Egyptians, descendant of Ham, were dark skinned. You can visualize this by turning to the back of the King James Version of the Bible and looking at map 1, the nations of Genesis 10. Okay, Phut and Mizraim in Egypt. Those were the two nations that were in Egypt. You look at Egypt today, you look at the hieroglyphs and the drawings on the, you can Google drawings on the caves in Egypt, where it clearly shows people of Egypt were dark skinned. As further evidence in the King James Version of the Bible, Genesis chapter 2, verse 13, and it reads, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia, Cush. So Cush is another descendant of Ham, who in that time was in Ethiopia. And we all know by looking at Google Images, and if you haven't traveled to Ethiopia on your own, you have secondhand material through the internet, magazines, and actually meeting an Ethiopian or dark skin. Joseph, Jacob's son, blended with the Egyptians because Joseph and the Egyptians were dark skinned. You can see this in the King James Version, Genesis chapter 45, verse 4. And Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Okay, so the brothers sold Joseph into Egypt because Jacob, his father, their father, favored Joseph. Because, pick a reason why a parent would favor a child, because they, the favorite comes close to the father's ideals. And not only the father, meaning Jacob's ideals, Joseph came close to God's ideals. Okay, Jacob was a descendant of Isaac, a descendant of Abraham, and God shown favoritism towards the bloodline of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph showed favor. Jacob showed favor in Joseph because Joseph was the one that came close to both Jacob's ideals and God's ideals. So the brothers got jealous and sold him to Egypt, and Joseph flourished in Egypt. He actually became a top advisor to the lead pharaoh out there during that time, and alerted the pharaoh ahead of time that a famine was coming. And so they had a chance to prepare, get all the food and water and everything else they need to prepare for a famine that was long in duration. So when Joseph's brothers came from the land that they came from, I think it was Jerusalem, they didn't recognize Joseph because, one, both the Egyptians and Joseph were dark skinned. Now, some may argue, well, Joseph was dressed like, an Egyptian, and that may be the case. But if Joseph was white, and if Joseph's brothers were white and they went to a land of dark-skinned people, they would have immediately picked Joseph out. They would have immediately recognized Joseph. And that wasn't the case because both Joseph and the Egyptians were dark-skinned. Solomon was black. Okay. And you can find that in the King James Version of the song of the Bible, in the book of the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Okay. Moses was dark-skinned. You can find that in the King James Version of the Bible, Exodus chapter 4, verse 6 and 7. And the Lord said furthermore unto him, put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his own hand into his bosom. And when he took it out, behold, his hands was leprous as snow. And he said, put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again and plucked it out of his bosom. And behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. Dark skin. Okay. Lastly, Jesus was dark skinned. King James Version of the Bible, Revelation chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. And his head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. His feet like unto fine brass, as if they burn in a furnace. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what color brass is other than brown, and burn in a furnace adds more tint to the already brown description of his feet. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a racist. I am just someone who dealt with insecurities all my life because of the projections from TV, magazine, all media, that dark-skinned people are inferior to Caucasian folks, white folks. This is not the case. Once we gain the knowledge of our ancestors, once we understand that the history that is contained in the Bible, we will see, and once we read other works that clearly show that dark-skinned people always had a positive impact on this world, we will begin to see other lies that are projected from the same media outlets that claim that they're looking out for your best interest. This piece of information is not end all be all, but I hope it's the start of something bigger and better to enrich our lives and to put one foot in front of the other with our heads up and begin to combat the false images that we see on a daily basis. This is Genius Infinity signing out.